just realizing like, oh, we're doing this thing together and we're in this together and like we're excited to figure it out together.
That was really refreshing to be in a situation where I didn't feel like I had to pretend like I had all the answers.
There was a sense of like childlike play. Did we all just become best friends?
Hi, friends. Welcome to another Dreams of Education podcast with me, Kelly Tenkely, and my friend and co-host,
Michelle Baldwin. Hey, it's been a while.
It's been a minute. So we were just catching up. So I'm sure a lot of that will flow into our conversation right here. But last week, it was AI Literacy Day nationally. And so people were doing kind of AI themed events kind of everywhere. I don't know if you saw in your inbox the same flood of emails of things that people were doing in honor of AI Literacy Day and trying to get everybody rallied around AI. But I co-hosted an event here in Denver, and I really was interested in what would happen if we didn't do your typical like conference, AI type conference and event, but what if instead we hosted a conversation that started with, are we asking the right questions? And are we starting in the right place with AI? And then what could that look like? So we played this protocol that was the game of 35, where essentially everybody puts, you've done this with me, where everybody puts a topic on a card that they're interested in, a topic or a question. And then you go in pairs and you try to convince the person that you're paired with that your topic is worth more points than their topic. You have 7 points to divide between yourselves. And so you decide on what that's going to be, and then you have to switch topics. So now you're taking my topic and going and selling it to someone else. And then we kind of rank on a timeline, the most, who got the most points versus the least points. And that was how we started conversations. But it was super interesting to see the different ways that people are thinking about using AI. And it wasn't just educators who joined us. There were, business folks, there were community members, parents. And so it was a really good mix of people. And the conversations went everything from like, how might AI be used in early childhood education to how do we keep the humanity in learning and use AI as a tool that can enhance that. What might that look like? There were a lot of questions about bias, but what do we do with bias knowing that there is bias baked in? Like, what do we do with that, and how do we ethically use these tools? So the conversations were just really fantastic. So I was just telling you about what those were like. I just keep thinking that as I was having these conversations, and I texted you after the event and said, I feel like we're still layering on to a broken, something that we've all kind of agreed is not working well. And we keep just trying to tweak instead of taking a step back and saying, here's a revolutionary moment where we could rethink the whole thing.
Right.
We keep just trying to tweak the systems that are already in place.
Yes. Please give me an AI designed worksheet for my kid to do, right? That's
right.
A worksheet isn't teaching anybody anything. And it also is very, very poorly demonstrating what a kid knows and is able to do. But now they're coming in the form of AI generating those worksheets.
And what is upsetting to me is we will call that personalization because that worksheet was personalized for a learner different. We're able to better differentiate. But if we're differentiating again with worksheets or with like, we're still tweaking these systems that we know are not working well. And I keep saying this, but like, we're just accelerating bad pedagogy. Like, can we do it more thoughtfully before we just start layering on tools and tweaking little bits of the system and then expecting that it's going to be this like incredible seismic shift in learning?
Well, and we've said it on the podcast before, but again, too many people believe that learning and school and education is a delivery model. And when we continue to look at AI as being able to personalize, which I think is hilarious because there's no person involved, and I say hilarious quite facetiously. AI cannot personalize because it's still coming from that delivery perspective. Learning does not occur because I deliver instruction.
Mm-hmm.
A child does not learn how to walk because someone shows them how to do it.
Yeah.
There's a whole set of processes in the human brain that have to happen first before a child can walk. And it also includes muscle development. But when you start looking at the process of learning, everyone learns from their own context. You can't teach a kid about a lion if they have never seen an animal, right? So we have to look at how the brain works and functions, how it goes beyond just memorizing and then regurgitating for a test. That's not learning. We've talked about that numerous times. So I'm always, again, I'm probably one of, I know you know this, but I get in arguments with other educators all the time in social media and other educational spaces about why I think AI is super problematic and I would not be using it with any kids at all right now. Maybe someday in the future, but if it's something that a human does specifically, if it's about a human process, AI shouldn't have anything to do with it. If I want to feed a bunch of code that I've written in a specific language and say, okay, my AI assistant, go help me put together some code for something that I did a long time ago that I can't remember I already did. That's okay, great. It's something that's already my work and I've taught it what to do and to only use my work and to help me do something faster. That part, okay, fine. I'm not taking a job away from another human being. Again, it's based on my work that I've consented to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
What about education makes anyone think that AI would actually be a better teacher when teaching and learning are both very, very personal things and social things, right? We've often talked about the social piece of learning and how important that is.
Do you think that part of the reason that people think AI can replace teachers is because teachers have been so disparaged and overlooked as a profession?
For sure.
I think in our society, like teachers are not looked at as something to aspire to necessarily. Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I think that we have so devalued what teachers actually do, what good teachers actually do, that for an outsider looking in, they're like, well, yeah, AI could do that. And I don't think that most people consider the nuance of what great teachers are actually doing. And I was thinking about research that white paper that came out, I think it's in the applied, I'm going to get it wrong, but Linda Darling Hammond put out this paper article with a host of other researchers, but basically they were breaking down the different pieces of what we know from applied science actually works in education. Mm-hmm. And nearly every single piece of what is in this paper is relationship.
Right.
Starting. So it's, that kids feel belonging, that they feel safe, that they there's all these components. And it's what we know this. It's mm-hmm. literally like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We know that this is necessary for higher order thinking. But to see all of the research and all of the data that we have that shows that this is really what we need is kids that feel like they have an advocate in the classroom, kids that we know that this works. And when I see the way that people are wanting to use AI in the classroom, I think you're right. Replacing the teacher with a bot or replacing just creating worksheets faster is not, again, we're just layering on bad pedagogy.
Well, and if you look at the number of school districts and states who have required teachers to be scripted, well, of course a bot could do that. right?
Yep.
If you're requiring a teacher, you're taking all the autonomy and the art out of teaching and the science out of the teaching, to be honest, and you say, okay, you're going to read exactly what this script says, the kids are going to do exactly this in the textbook. Again, yes, a bot could do that, but that's not. We know really great teachers who are required to do that and excel in spite of that requirement, and are great teachers in spite of all of those requirements. But if that's what you think education is, or that's what you want for other people's kids, because you know that's not going to happen for everybody's kids, right? Whose kids get the human teachers and whose kids get the AI bots?
Right.
There's already some companies trying to do that. And I'm like, this is not okay. We need to speak up and say it's not right. It's unacceptable. We are not going to create second-class citizens for kids because they got the bot versus a teacher who knew them and had a personal relationship in learning with them.
I think it's hard too, because I hear some parents go, well, I think that would be great if my kid has this like individualized tutor that's working with them and that never gets tired of their questions and all of these things. And I think when people are thinking that way, one, again, we're thinking of it as a delivery model, right? The purpose of education is just delivery, like transfer of information. The other piece that I think is that we go back to our own experiences, and our nearest own experiences are usually college or high school or things like that. And we remember our experience of being in school and having my experience of high school was we would, get assigned the pages to read, we would read them, and then we would take the test, right? And so we remember the lowest level of the thinking that was happening in our school experience. And we're like, well, yeah, that could be outsourced to AI. And that would be better, right? We're not considering that those were not our favorite teachers. Those are not the people who deeply changed us as humans. That's not the experience that made us who we are. And we're also forgetting that if we live in this age where AI is taking jobs, transfer of knowledge is not a useful skill for people to have. So educating kids that way, as if that's what education is not preparing them for a world where AI exists.
Right.
And so I'm like, there's so many layers of this isn't going to work well.
It keeps coming back to, are we in school to learn stuff? Or are we in school to help develop our brains that help us take the stuff we're learning about and do new things with those things that we're learning? It's the thinking that's getting replaced. Learning is not a consumption thing only. Yeah, obviously there are some things you have to learn in order to do something more advanced. But I still argue that you don't have to, it's something as simple as, addition, facts, and math. If I only tell you that 5 + 5 is 10, but you never experience moving things around and seeing it in different patterns and understanding what those numbers represent, you're only memorizing. And again, now we go back to people who have struggles with memory, but who are brilliant or are slow processors, but still brilliant, now have a disadvantage because we're only reaching that one level of kind of thinking. And it's not just remembering, I think you and I talked about this before, like, we'll have people who might be really good at playing Jeopardy if they know the answer, but they also know the logic, because sometimes even Jeopardy, when you read a question, it isn't just knowing the answer off the top of your head or recalling it. Sometimes there's some logic involved. And if you don't know how to think, logic has left you behind, right? That's not going to be something you've practiced.
I worry about how much cognitive atrophy we introduce by outsourcing all of it in the ways that we currently are thinking.
Yes.
As is a larger society.
It's the same people who complain that kids can't do simple math or count back change without a calculator. They're the same ones who are also saying, but I think AI would be a great idea. I'm like, no, because who's doing the work?
Yeah.
At Anastasis, we often talked about who's doing the work. If the teacher's front and center in the classroom, the kids are not doing the bulk of the learning. If the kids are doing all of the work and the teacher's moving around and helping and assisting and guiding, and maybe we need to shift gears here and adjusting as needed per kid, then that's when the learning is happening with the kids. So who's doing the work?
It's funny. I was going back through some notes today as I'm writing my book, because I'm like, I know I put some goodies in there somewhere. But as I was going through, this must have been something that I put in a newsletter or something as we were having these math conversations with families where they were like so heavily focused on the memorization of facts and their kids knowing. And I had written, the calculator doesn't know why it performs algorithms. It simply follows a set of rules. What we seek at Anastasis is kids who think like mathematicians, who understand number relationships and part to whole and why those relationships might be important in the world. So like, yes, they can carry around a calculator all the time and do in their pocket, right? But we actually need people who can think like mathematicians, not who can just perform the algorithm. So I think we're talking about something very similar with AI of it can perform a lot of incredible algorithms, but it doesn't help kids think.
Yes. And that was something that I talked with parents a lot about math, just like you were saying before, when they were talking about they have to know their math facts. I'm like, that's like the very surface level of understanding. Yes, we want them to understand and memorize their math facts, but if they don't know why something happens, if you don't understand the why behind the algorithm, it's just the how, then you haven't really learned it. You've memorized it only. And that deeper knowledge comes from when you understand why the algorithm is the way that it is, because then things start to click and make sense. And when a new or novel situation comes to you, you're able to problem solve that because you understand the why behind it. The example that I used earlier about, if I was using AI with my own coding and I said, okay, I'm training it on my own work, please go find this a solution for this problem. If I don't already know how to code and understand the logic behind the coding, when the bot brings me back a result, I still have to look at it to make sure it's correct. Because if it's not correct,
you're the one interpreting, right?
Yes.
And we are the meaning makers, we are the interpreters. And I think we're not teaching kids well. What I see, the way I currently see large language models being used in education with students, I don't see it being used in ways that are going to develop those skills of being the meaning maker, being the interpreter. And it was almost laughable. One of the conversations I was in, somebody had said like, well, what do we do about the, kids using AI to cheat? And I was like, well, but you're creating the lesson plan and the worksheets with AI. You're also using it to quote unquote cheat. I'm like, both sides of that I see as being problematic because you're seeing what them using a tool is cheating, but you're using the same tool to deliver the content and the whatever. And I was also thinking about what happens when teachers are using AI to create the assignments. Students are using AI to complete the assignments. At some point, it's just computers talking to each other, and there's no and
the teachers are using AI to grade the assignments.
To grade it, yeah. So there's no human in that loop at all. Like the human's been completely removed, and we want to hold kids to a standard that the adults are not being we're not following that. So it's just interesting to think about. Again, I don't think AI is bad. I don't think large language models are bad. Do I think that there are things that we need to consider and be really thoughtful about as we're designing and considering how it might be used in learning spaces? Absolutely.
And if those conversations aren't being held, and if you have folks saying, we're requiring you to use this because it's the way of the future, there are a lot of ethical decisions that are being made for you. And if that's not being questioned, we have some major problems. I saw today somebody posted an image of the water cycle, which I used to teach a lot with kids at Anastasis.
Yeah.
And we did a lot of hands-on learning so that they really got an idea. We could simulate things. We go out and watch weather and talk about it. Multi-layered of how we approached learning the water cycle. We didn't just, draw an image and be done. And I saw someone post an AI generated image of the water cycle today, and it was wrong. And that person didn't know that it was wrong.
Oh, no.
So
Truly.
Oh,
gosh.
Precipitation and condensation were reversed.
Oh.
So again,
deeply problematic.
It is. And if you don't know enough about something, again, we keep going back to, there are things you need to know and understand. And if you're constantly relying on something else to do the thinking for you, we lose that ability. That's that atrophy in cognitive ability and skills, right? We lose the ability to know, well, the computer said, we used to talk about the internet in these terms, right? Just because you search for something and you find a result on the web doesn't mean that it's correct. What do we do? How can we be digital citizens, good digital citizens, and learn how to fact check that? And it looks to me right now that a lot of people are using AI bots and chat GPT even as a search engine. Like, we already have search engines.
Well, and unfortunately now so many of the search engines just use their own large language model to deliver results. And
I always skip past that.
It makes me insane.
Because I'm still on I need to make sure that the results that come in, that I'm looking at multiple sources. I'm checking, are these sources that I trust? Have I ever even heard of this particular, news source, right? Yeah. Because some of those are also AI generated and they don't tell you that off the bat. So all of these skills that we go back and we say we want kids to have the ability to really think and understand. But if you're assuming off the bat that an AI chatbot, how are kids supposed to know if that result is true or not, if they have never had to do the thinking and they're only regurgitating out what a bot is teaching them to do?
And I go back to, again, regurgitating is the wrong starting place in education, which that's the tweak, right? The tweak is I agree. AI makes your life as a teacher in a very traditional system easier, right? Because you're already just a delivery system at that point. So yes, it makes that easier. Is that the right focus and starting point for learning? And I don't think it is. I think the right starting point was interesting in our conversations. The early childhood folks and the Montessori folks were in a discussion about what might AI look like in their spaces. And both were pretty adamant, like the kids should not be like, I don't want kids using this because, the beauty of Montessori is that they're hands-on and they're exploring and discovering these and manipulating, playing. And it's so central to the Montessori philosophy, right? And then the early childhood is like, yes, it's all play. Like, I need to see how they're playing and interacting. And, when a child bites another child, like I need to be there to help navigate that situation. And so I don't want to outsource any of that to AI. They were thinking more like, what could it be useful for on the teacher end? But it was interesting in the conversation because they were like, the deep noticing, the observation, the interaction that I'm having with the child at their level, the questions, it's the interplay between all the kids in the classroom and the materials in the classroom. And that's really where all the learning is. And I was like, yes. And somehow, Michelle, in education, we have decided that when kids get just a little bit older, that none of that is important anymore. And I think what you and I get so frustrated about is we're like, that's actual learning and that should be the way it is. Yes, we've changed that. We've made our schooling system look very different than that, but that's actually what learning looks like. Right. And that's why we're like shouting at Anastasis, like we should take that principle all the way through every level of schooling because it doesn't change just because they're older. Like we still want to see how they're thinking, how they're pulling apart ideas, how they're collaborating, what they're doing in discussions, their body language. Like there's so much that a teacher is getting from all of that is just not going to happen.
Right.
When we remove the teacher from the equation.
It's not efficient, Kelly.
And I know it's not efficient.
We have talked again about this on the podcast before, but we also need to recognize that not everything needs to be efficient. And in fact, it's detrimental if we try to make it efficient. It is very difficult to educate millions of children in the United States. I understand that. There are a lot of kids who live in very high, very dense population areas. And how do we educate all of them in an equitable way? So what ends up happening, and again, education costs money. So every time we try to make something efficient, well, let's just put more kids in the classroom. Okay, so now we've got 30 kids in a classroom and I'm supposed to teach them all individually. That's not going to happen. So the first thing that gets pulled out is that relational teaching. And what's easier to grade? Well, you've got worksheets. What's easier? Oh, I can give them all an AI tutor. Look at how easy this is.
Standardization.
But now again, we've got kids who are being taught in an unethical situation where they're expected to do work assigned by, whether it's by a teacher who's scripted or by an AI bot. Every kid says, I want more hands-on learning. I want more field trips. I want to be able to take care of my bodily functions during the day without getting yelled at. Right. And again, you go back to, are these kids, does your school look more like a prison where kids can't have any freedom or autonomy at all? Or are they allowed to make choices? And then you have a caring adult next to them who helps them learn how to make informed decisions and better choices throughout the day. And I just remember thinking about all of the kids that we've had go through anastasis and the parents who came back to us like, I don't know how you did it, but somehow it's translating into much more responsibility at home. And I would say, okay, tell me more about this. Well, they used to leave all their clothes around for me to pick up, and now they're doing things without me asking. And I'm like, oh, that's because they've had freedom at school that they're expected to manage at an age-appropriate level, right? But there are expectations of them to be independent to some degree, and we teach them with that in mind, as well as how, like, here's a consequence, a natural consequence if you misuse your freedom. And it's really, again, it was really interesting too. Quite a few of our parents would say, I feel like I've also gotten a parenting lesson that I didn't realize I needed. And again, that wasn't to say that we all knew better than everyone else. We don't know people's kids better than they do.
No, and we were also learning alongside as the process was unfolding. Right. Because, as I'm writing this book, I'm like, when I go back and I look at what we did year one and versus what it looked like in later years, and it changed because we changed. The way we understood and responded to kids changed as our learning about emotions changed, as our learning about, like, we all changed and learned along with them. And I look back at the inquiry blocks that we did with kids and I was like, oh my gosh, yes, they learned so much about empathy and compassion, but so did I. In that process, alongside them. I was looking back at notes that I had taken when Amal the poet came and did the spoken word and what she said in metanoia, and I was trying to keep like a transcript of what she had said. So I missed a lot of it because it's pretty broken. But as I'm reading through, I'm like, that experience wholly changed me. And my outlook and how I thought about things. This young woman coming in and sharing her story and her spoken word and why the poetry and words were so important and how she got to the place she is. Like, it moved the whole community, not just the kids. And so I'm like, how do you keep growing in your practice? And we want to outsource everything. We want to outsource professional development to somebody over here who's going to deliver professional development. We want to outsource learning to AI to deliver the content. And the reality is, you don't need professional development in the way you think you do when you're having experiences like that are so transformative along with your students. I mean, we had kids who that experience led them to interacting with the refugee population in Colorado and them meeting and hearing these stories and being so moved and then saying, Ms. Tenkely, you've got to meet Fardus and you've got to hear her story. And can we put on a silent auction to raise money for these organizations that are supporting these? Like, that changed me. I know it changed you. I know it changed every adult in that building. And no professional development could have matched living that alongside kids.
And that that was the note I wanted to make. It wasn't just us being affected separately from the students, because we got to have conversations with the kids and listen to them and hear how the kids talked about it and then contribute to. And I could say, I didn't know XYZ about this. Or did you hear when she said this piece of her poem? And what did that mean to you? And then here's what it felt like to me. And the kids, again, could see that learning is not just something that happens in school up until a certain age, that you can be, and I think we use lifelong learner as kind of a cliche now, but you can be a lifelong learner and you're always going to be learning new things, and you're always going to be taking that and making it personal to you, because that's just part of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
I also think too, Kelly, as you were talking about that, how many times like the humanities gets kind of pushed aside for things that are tested. And again, if AI is delivering and we continue to focus on the things that are tested, then all of the things in the humanities and the arts are getting left out. And sometimes people will say, well, they're just not as important as math and science. And I'm like, okay, but let me tell you, here's how I know. Because our kids were able to see and make connections. If we were learning about a scientific concept like kinetic energy, they could also find art or create art that helped illustrate the concept. And sometimes I was instrumental in helping them get to that place, but sometimes they were the ones that made that connection separately from me. And I was like, my gosh, that's so exciting.
From another teacher, another inquiry block, or another
just a
experience,
kid.
Or
when kids are able to make some, and they're this learning that's happening with each other, not to each other. That's when I think it's also extremely powerful for kids to know that they have the ability to be a teacher. I'm not saying get rid of the word student and get rid of the word teacher, that people have like a real problem with that. But to let people know that we're always learning, and it doesn't matter if you're the one with a degree or you're the one who's 6 sitting in a chair in the classroom, coming up on this epiphany moment when you share something that you're also teaching your teacher. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's really cool. I wonder what you'll say. I think I know what you'll say, but I wonder what you'll say to the people who are like, yes, we have the content areas, and those are really important for kids to learn, those content areas of math, reading, writing, science, social studies. And part of the great thing about AI is it can accelerate kids' learning in those areas so that we can spend more time in the arts and humanities.
I just would disagree, because accelerated doesn't mean what you think it means in learning. I think getting more challenging and happening faster doesn't necessarily mean that the kids are actually learning it faster. And also, if
they might be retaining it faster to repeat on a test.
Right. That doesn't mean
faster.
It's not internalized.
But we know that doesn't necessarily equate to long-term understanding.
And what we found out too is every time you separate the content areas, your learning is not as deep. When you integrate interdisciplinarity, right? When they're able to talk about something that's a social studies concept at the same time as a science concept at the same time as a music or an art, like paintings, whatever. When they're together, then the learning is rich and it's full. When it's siloed, a lot of kids miss making those connections, and therefore are weaker at making connections long term.
Yeah. I mean, the number, I think about how many kids don't realize that physics is algebra because they're taught as separate things.
And music and sound
and music and
science.
All of it, right?
Yeah.
Algorithms, like, that we're using to code, all of those things. I think because we learn it in such abstraction and silos that unless you naturally look for connections or have reason to understand those connections, I don't know that I would have realized that algebra and physics were one and the same as a high school student, except for I happened to be taking them at the same time.
Right.
And so then it was like, oh, and then I was wondering, well, why isn't this just a combined class? Like, why am I learning it here and here instead of learning it in context?
Right.
Didn't make sense to me. But I just wonder how much of that might be missed when we again, we're taking the same bad pedagogy of siloed subjects.
Yeah.
We're applying AI to it and assuming that that's going to make it better instead of asking the question, should this be taught as separate? Should all the content areas be separate, or might there be a better starting point? And I know we would both argue that inquiry is the better starting point, hard stop.
I will still go back to, I think a lot of people just don't, anyone who, I've had quite a few arguments with people, again, online and in person, about how they don't think inquiry is good for kids because it's like, just wandering around. And I'm like, then you don't really understand what inquiry learning is.
I would speed agree with that.
So
yeah,
I think it's important that we have to voice what we know and understand. But if we think we know something and we haven't actually ever interacted in that space, maybe not push things away because we don't understand it. So in other words, I, again, have had a lot of people who will tell me that inquiry is actually bad for kids because they never get a good solid foundation of factual understanding. And I'm like, that's not how inquiry works. And if that's how it is in any experience that you've had, I'm sorry, because that you were in a situation that was wrong.
And I was going to say, to me, that's not true inquiry.
No.
You think, we told people this all the time, but how do we learn anything in our lives before formalized education?
Right.
It's all inquiry. It's all contextual. It's all...
And they were master, if you look at the master and apprentice type of learning, obviously those are very specialized cases. And if you think like I'm just pulling something out of my head, but like a blacksmith, right? Mm-hmm. And you had the master and the apprentice. Well, that person was immersed in the area where a blacksmith was working and watching and asking questions and hearing. Yes, some of it was demonstration, some of it was listening and consuming, but all of it was in an immersive situation. If I like to think about language, if we are learning a new language after a certain age, it's a lot harder because we only have our own language to use that as a framework for learning the new language. And if the languages have similar syntax or even like verb stems, I know French pretty well. I'm conversational in French, but I'm learning Spanish. There are a lot of similarities in French and Spanish. There are more similarities with Italian and Spanish, but because all of them have a lot of the same basic Latin stems, it's really easy to learn. To sleep in French is the same as to sleep in Spanish. It's easier for me to learn those because I already have that framework.
Yeah.
If I'm trying to learn a language and I'm not immersed in a place where people speak that language, I'm only getting the textbook version of it. And that's not how people speak. It would be like learning
conversational.
Yes. Yeah. It'd be like trying to learn English, which, kudos to those of you who have English as another language, because
seriously,
good grief. It would be like only learning how to speak English based on an English textbook. So again, the metaphor there is that there are ways to immerse yourself in learning. And if it's only one system that you're put into, it's artificial.
Yeah.
And the understanding
literally artificial.
Exactly. And it's interesting that's what AI is, right?
Yeah. And
truly AI bots and LLMs are not actually artificial intelligence. We've just called it that. They're not sentient, thank God. But you're not going to get actual intelligence out of it. It cannot create something new. It can only take pieces and parts of something that already exists and shove it together. And it may or may not actually make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes, I don't know, I enjoy using AI. You know how my brain works, and I make real random connections all the time. It's really interesting for me to say, I've been thinking a lot about integral theory and spiral dynamics and how that might apply, but I wonder if there's any overlap into something completely abstract and different from that. And there's no right answer, right? Mm-hmm. Literally, there's no right answer because it's a made up connection in my brain. What I find interesting is that sometimes it uncovers something for me. But again, I'm the thinker in that scenario. I have enough understanding of what it is and what it's doing and the role I'm playing in that, and, how I'm thinking about it, that those are all skills that we have to teach kids. And I don't understand how we expect that kind of level of thinking and problem solving and questioning is going to happen when we are still focused on memorizing content and then getting excited when AI can help us do it faster. Because I just look at how many career areas that AI seems to be drastically changing or killing altogether. And I'm like, how are we going to keep teaching kids the way that we've been teaching them? That's very industrial revolution. How are we going to keep that philosophy and pedagogy and expect that they're going to leave that system of learning and be able to function? And in a world where AI is being used by we're going to have people who can think and problem solve and collaborate and do human things.
I keep coming back to who's doing the programming of the specific AI tool, because if it is taking someone else's job, you're taking the human aspect out. And again, there's too many times when people say, well, it's human, as if that's a derogatory statement. We're taking the human aspect out of it. I'm like, no, I want to keep the human part of it, because that's the thinking part. An artificial intelligence tool, any kind of a model that's taught to do something, somebody has to be the programmer / teacher of that tool. And right now, most of the people doing that work look the same. They have very similar life experience. And they don't always know what it's like for people who don't look and think and believe like them. So they're only able to pull in just a very little bit of what they know, and they're excluding all this other communal thought.
Not to mention that what it is being trained on is often also those who have had a voice and throughout history, right? So that adds layers of that bias that we were talking about. And how do we ensure, again, we just have to start with better conversations before we just rush to add things to classrooms. But how do we ensure that we're being really thoughtful and intentional and understanding what and who and how it has come about, so that we know ethically that it should be in a classroom with all of society, right?
And what are the beliefs of the person who is programming a specific tool? How does that interact with a child? There have already been several cases, I'm not going to call them out online, even though I really, really want to, that have basically spit back pretty horrific and volatile responses to kids who are under the age of 18, who don't know how. Again, when you've got somebody who doesn't have a lot of world experience as a child, getting this information from a bot that's supposed to be, great, and yet it's telling them things about themselves that are untrue or that are racist, there's a whole bunch of items on the list that we could say this is problematic, right? How can you guarantee that your product isn't doing that for kids if you're not the one, first of all, involved in the decision making? If the kids and the families aren't involved in the decision making, I'm not okay with any of that. And the examples that I'm thinking of that I've seen online, I would be furious if that was my child in a school getting an answer. We can even look at just the written curriculum and how different they are from state to state based on what they allow to be published versus what they won't publish. And now we're going to allow that to happen with AI as well. I also, we talked about the Eliza effect quite a few podcasts ago. And just a very, very brief reminder of what that is. There was a computer in the 60s programmed to be conversational, and how that affected people who were interacting with it. We love to anthropomorphize things. We do it with our pets. Sometimes some of us do it with our plants.
My pets are...
again, a pet
people in my house
can think and have some kind of emotional response, right? But now we're just even listening to students when they were using Siri on their iPads.
Absolutely.
Sometimes they would talk to Siri as if it was a friend, and I would make sure I'd say, "Oh, you know that's not a real person, right?" It can only answer what it's been programmed to do. Oh, but no, she can tell me what the weather is. I'm like, she's not really a she. This is a computer program,
computer.
Friends.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was really hard because they would have conversations. Quite a few kids do that with their echoes and things that they have at home.
The number of times that when you and I were co-teaching that class at the end of last year, the number of times those kids would just have full conversations with Siri. And it was like, God.
I think there was an episode of The Big Bang Theory, which, some people watch, some people don't, but where one of the characters kind of was getting into a relationship with his iPhone because, and there was another movie based on that too. I think it was called Her or something like that. Her or she. Yeah. Like, is it her or she?
It's called Her.
And they're not real.
Garjo.
Yes, they're not real relationships. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they can take the place of a human relationship. And we have to understand how incredibly damaging that is to a human psyche and what that can do to your cognitive skills as well. We rethink a lot of this.
Yeah, there's so much.
There's so much.
Okay. Hypothetically, Michelle, as we were talking about how teachers might use this AI in early childhood or Montessori, and we started in the place of what do we wish existed, or what feels like a burden right now that it might be able to help with. And both said, it feels really hard to notice all of what's going on in a classroom and then to communicate that in a good way with families. But then when we started talking about like the current tools out there to assess students or communicate with family, like to build things to communicate with families, both were like, oh no, that like part of the beauty is that I'm communicating these things with the families. And like that part's important too. So there was that, but I kept remembering our friend Colin Reynolds and Kid Cam that he did, where he had the GoPros on the kiddos' foreheads, and then he would use that to make his newsletters and to share what was happening in the classroom, and different kids would wear the Kid Cam each week. He had all kinds of, everybody signed off on that. The parents knew the way there was waivers, all of the things. But I remember Colin talking about how long it took to go through all of that footage, but how much richness that he got every week as he was seeing the classroom through the kids' eyes, and the conversations they were having and the interactions, and even how they were experiencing different parts of the classroom based on how tall they were. He was working with kindergartners. And so I was telling these ECE folks about that. And I was just saying how neat that process was. And I said, but it had to be, a gazillion hours of footage every week to go through. And I was like, it would be interesting if you had an internal AI, meaning it's not going out into the world. It's not training anybody else. It's just internal. It would be interesting to have help editing something like that and making meaning, and being able to have it flag, did you realize that this child you spent 90% of your week with? I wouldn't want that to be used by administration or anybody else besides the teacher, because I was thinking like 90% with a kid, we've had those weeks where that's because that child, we were showing up the way that child needed us to show up. So, but more as a reflection tool for the teacher, we all were like, that would be really interesting as a self-reflection tool. Again, I wouldn't want it to be used as how are you doing your teaching, or I wouldn't want it for any of those things. I would want it for self-reflection, and then to help tell the story of the week through video without actually having to be editing down that many hours of video.
I also instant red flags for me are student privacy.
Tell me.
Student privacy, first and foremost. I feel like
even with an internal system, that would still be your concern.
Yes, because do you think for 1 minute that it would be able to stay that way?
Well, I mean,
I mean,
depends on how it's built, I suppose.
Right. And how many people would then just jump on that idea to like, well, every classroom should do this. And now we're using it to not only surveil the teachers, but also to surveil every student. Our kids are under constant surveillance.
Yeah.
And that some of it is allowed by adults, and the kids think that is a really cool thing. Like if I just stop to think about like, people that I know that I'm connected to who record every ounce of their day, and it's all online. And how many families.
Are you talking about me right now?
No. I'm more like you're an adult and you can consent to whatever you do, right? But I'm also thinking about families who post their pictures and videos nonstop
every single
of their
thing
kids.
of their Yeah.
Yes. And how those kids do not have the ability to consent. If they can't sign a contract when they're 5 years old, because of course they can't, they don't have informed consent. Now you have kids growing up who have a digital footprint that they never created. It was created for them.
They had no say in.
Exactly. So now take that into schools. I think too, like everybody has moments of regret of something they've said or they've done or a mistake. And now all of that is on video or audio even. I'm not saying that we have things to hide, but I also think we act different. It's like the quantum particles. They act differently when they're observed.
Yeah.
Human beings act differently when they're on video, when they're being observed. They cannot be their true selves. So I look at it going, again, there were times when I used video, again, with consent of families and with, as much as kids could say yes, but kids also had the opportunity to opt out.
You did a really good job of saying, is it okay if I send this to your mom?
Yeah. Because,
is it okay if I share this with your family?
Right. They knew that they were going to have pictures taken to go only to their families in newsletters and things like that. True. And then we also, when we would do things for social media for our school, I was like, I'm going to be really careful to only photograph them from behind or just their hands, nothing that could be identifying, but that you could see a student was doing work. And to me, that was really important because, again, I don't want these kids to feel like they're constantly being watched by people they don't even know.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to your original question, I'm getting to that point where I'm letting fear and lack of trust rule.
Mm-hmm.
For the sake of kids, I'm going to.
I do see exactly what you're saying of these really, I will say wholesome and like well-intentioned ideas when put to scale can have a very dark side. Yes. And I do understand that. And again, that's why like, how do we be thoughtful and ask the right questions and think about this from multiple angles and have the critical friend who can say, yeah, but we are mostly and people at Anastasis. But when we're talking about things that really can impact kids, I am glad to have your voice, even if it sometimes rains on my parade of my great idea.
We've had it happen too, where we've whether it was at Anastasis or in other schools that we worked with, we started off with a company that was very small. Everything was self-contained. They, promised these things about student data, and then they got purchased, and that all went out the door. And now you lose control. And I have a lot of people push back on me saying, your data is gone. There's everywhere. You don't have control over it. Stop trying to control it. And I'll push back and say, I know that. I'm not naive enough to think that my information isn't everywhere. However, what I gladly hand over to someone versus what someone steals are two different things. And if it comes to kids, I will not gladly hand over anything just because you say it's in a contract now. That doesn't mean that somebody else who buys you out is going to honor that. And we've seen that happen time after time.
We do. And I guess I was thinking more along the lines of what companies do when they create their own enterprise product for that company, and it's only used, right? Or it starts only used by that company unless they the reality of that happening in schools, I don't know how realistic that is for every school to have their own kind of enterprise software in that way. But
I wonder too, we know that we miss things. I mean, again, human, and I don't want to outsource that to something that isn't human just because sometimes it's good that we don't have attention on every single aspect of every single thing throughout every single day. I think
Sure.
that for kids, a lot of times that struggle and the wrestling with an idea, and I don't quite have it yet. And I don't like that my struggle is broadcast to everybody, because
Sure.
what I really want to do is say, oh my gosh, now I understand this. And then I can talk about my journey. But that's right.
Yeah. I was thinking about the times where you all would send me the conversation that you were having with a student, like a video of a conversation you were having with a student where you're like, oh, we got to tell Miss Tenkely this, and she's not here today. Like, let's record it. And how much insight that gives to parents about what inquiry actually looks like, and the process and the conversation and the wrestling with, and how many times we had parents who saw things like that, who would come back and say, I had no idea how you got that out of them, but watching the way that interplay worked, like, now I get it. To me, I'm like, how do we capture that magic, and how could that not feel so overwhelming as it sometimes does as the teacher, right? And so
it's not scalable. I think that's it. Personally, I truly believe it is not scalable. And if we try to make it so, we just increase more bad practice in dealing with humans. And for the sake of trying to capture all the magic, we actually lose something in that, because now it's everywhere, right? Rather than
and it's always you'd have to figure out, like, the always on wouldn't work well. But the problem is you don't know that it's a magical moment until it's happening.
Sometimes magic moments happen and nobody sees them, and that's okay, I think.
It's true. And how many times were we like, oh, I wish your parent had just seen this, like,
I know, it's like I see both sides of that. And again, I was just telling you that I was swimming with a sea turtle in the ocean last week, and actually several sea turtles. And then one day when I was with one, sorry, didn't mean to, it's not, there was a reason for that. But anyway, I kept trying to get my camera in my phone in my waterproof package to record it. And I spent more time doing that than I did just existing in the moment and being happy that I was swimming with the turtle. And I did catch myself eventually go, what are you doing? This is stupid. And I stopped trying to mess with my phone, and I just enjoyed being in the moment. And I feel like hours and hours and hours, probably years of my life, have been lost trying to capture something rather than just enjoying it in the moment. Like,
who's watching these?
I'm so, Kelly, you know how, like, I am such a techie.
Are you becoming a Luddite?
No. And what's really interesting is, like, the definition of that isn't what we think it is, but how we've used it has morphed into something else. But I am starting to really reflect more on, is the technology that I'm using right now, whatever it happens to be, making this a better experience for me or people around me, or am I just complicating something that didn't need to be this complicated? And I think, especially as I get older and I look, not only at my own mortality, but just here's what I want to do with the rest of my life. How much of it do I want to complicate versus just exist in something that makes me really happy? And I'm finding that a lot of the things that technology used to do to connect me are actually making me more stressed out, more anxious. And the more I get away from it, and I'm not bagging on all technology. I still think there are a lot of things that make our lives better, obviously.
Here's what I think is interesting in all of what you just said, and just knowing you, the parts where any of it went wrong is when money got involved.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
Do you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
the part where you're like, here's where that goes wrong is when money gets involved. Here's where it goes wrong with the social media platforms. We loved the bird before money got involved. We loved Pinterest before money got involved. Like all of these things start out as human connectors with that purity of we just want to, like, how do we connect humans? And then the money gets involved and it gets distorted and
So say
it changes.
if it's something that's actually transformative, right? Then yes. If it's taking me to something that is better for me or for other people, then yes. If it's just a substitute for something else, then I don't know that it's not adding to the quality of life for me. And
do you have a for example?
The example that I just said about the turtle, right?
Oh, yeah.
Why was I taking the video of it? So I could relive it or so I could share it? And that I didn't have an answer for that. And again, I realized that the turtle was taking off. My husband was taking off. And I was, standing in the middle of the ocean because I was able to stand and trying to press a button that wasn't working because it was through this, layers and layers of plastic. And I'm like, this is so dumb. Just go swim with the turtle. It's okay. You don't have to have proof that you swam with the turtle. Go do it. Same thing. Am I interacting with the people who are in the same room with me? Or am I staring at my phone and having a discussion with somebody that isn't necessarily connecting us as humans?
Right.
And doing something that helps further the human. And I looked at that a lot with kids too, because I really started to notice how much that we kept talking about, we're using the iPads as a tool, or we're using this app as a tool, and it's really going to help us. If it didn't transform what the kids were learning, I said, we're putting the iPads away right now because we're going to go do something else. And I would bet you most of the kids would say that the things that really stuck with them were not things that we did on their iPads necessarily. That it was probably something that someplace we visited.
Not unless it was something that built on, like when they made the
space station in Minecraft.
Yes, in Minecraft. But that started in totally different places also. It didn't start with that as anything. It started in all the other places. And then it was like, oh, you know what we could do? Yeah.
Well, and they built it in multiple places with paper and cardboard and drew drawings and drew all the things, right? So it wasn't just that we only did that thing. It was a different iteration. And we realized that if we build this in Minecraft, we can make it really look like the space station so we can learn more about the space station. And it wasn't just, this is a cool thing we can do. And that's what I mean when I say it's transformative. It's taking something to another level where we have a better understanding, not just because it's cool and we can.
Yeah. I like the reflection in the moment of, am I capturing this so that I can go back to it, or am I capturing it to share with others? I wonder what the version of that the questions that teachers could run through when it comes to AI or tech.
Yeah.
And I think the transformative is a good one. Is this transforming the experience, or is it just technology in the classroom?
Yeah. Is it helping again, we're going back to what we'd said at the very beginning of this episode, is who's doing the thinking and the work. And if the technology, whether it's AI or something else, is doing all of the thinking for us, then it's not helping to contribute to understanding and actual learning. So if it's helping us to elevate that and dive a little deeper, then by all means, yes, let's use that tool. But if it's taking away too many of the thought processes so that we can do something because it saves time, I'm not of the mindset anymore that saving time is actually always better. And I think in most cases it's worse.
I think that's that lie of efficiency again. Like, just because it can save time doesn't mean that it's time well saved.
Right. And that efficiency steals from the greatness of and the richness of the activities of what you could be doing. Yes, they're always harder to assess objectively. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we in education have gotten to well, it's only fair if we give everybody the exact same test. And that shows really who's learning and who's not, or who's doing a better job or who's working harder. And I'm looking back going, we already know that grades don't tell or don't provide an accurate picture. So again, what exactly is the efficiency for?
Right. We talked about assessment came up quite a bit at our AI literacy event. And we talked about the standardization of it, the inequity like baked into that, forget layering AI onto it. There's already inequity baked into that process. There's already bias baked into that. Like we know this. And as we were talking about assessment and how inefficient it is to get really good understanding of where kids are and how they're thinking. I kept coming back to, and we used to use this word all the time at Anastasis, and we kind of, I don't know, stepped away from it, or I don't know, it just became part of the process and we've stopped talking about it. But this idea of ipsative assessment, right? Where you're measuring against itself and the forward progress. And I don't think that in education on a wide scale, we do ipsative assessment. It's always normative or comparative or these other pieces. And again, we learned at Anastasis in real time that as we're assessing, students can get the right answer and we might assume that they have learned it, right? We might enter the score that says they've learned this, they hit the mark, they've got it. But in the way that we did assessment and in the amount of conferring and talking, sitting beside and talking with students, what we would often hear the students say is, well, I don't know that I'm ready to move on to the next thing yet because yes, I got the right answer, but I really struggled with this part. I was kind of shaky here, asked, 3 people if this was right. I wasn't confident in my answer. So they were getting better at that self-reflection of saying, I'm not ready for the next, don't introduce the next thing. To me, that is symbiosis there of relationship, of teacher understanding really, how are you thinking about this? Do you understand it? Are you ready to move on? Is so important, because if you had just gotten the feedback that you gave the score at the top and said, yes, they've learned it, move on, we may have moved them on earlier than what they were really ready for. And if it doesn't matter anyway, because we've got such a standardized curriculum that it's never taking them, maybe people figure out how to code that process into AI grading systems where it's asking the students questions. But I don't know that they're going to reflect in as honest a way as they do when we're sitting beside them, knowing that we're going to support them through all of that.
Well,
ostensibly, the AI could also quote unquote do that. I just don't know that it has the same feel when it's not human to human.
Yeah.
Because you can trick the AI and say, yeah, I totally understand it and let's move on because, I'm tired of doing this today.
Right. And if it's a human, and again, if you know your students well enough, there were times when kids were like, oh yeah, I totally got this. And so I would ask them more questions and say, what makes you think that you really have a deeper understanding? And that's when I could also tell if that kid was just done talking to me that day or that they really did understand it. Because sometimes they would just say, I get it, but they wouldn't be done with the conversation. And again, knowing those kids well enough and also trusting the kids.
Body language.
They weren't intentionally trying to be dishonest. It was, I don't have any more capacity for this conversation. If I didn't know that about that kid, and if I also was a person who didn't trust kids, that would sound like somebody was lying and trying to grade themselves higher than they needed to be. And if you have a deep distrust for kids, first of all, you shouldn't be in education, but that's another story. If you have a deep distrust of kids, you are not going to be able to accurately assess what they do at all, because you're always assuming that they won't tell you the truth, right? Mm-hmm. There are a lot of adults in education who do that.
I know. And I wonder how much of that is baked into those algorithms that we're not even really aware of, just because that's the nature of how we've done school for so long.
Right. Think about the tests with all the gotcha questions. Is it a gotcha question that helps make a kid think and reflect, or is it just a gotcha question to see if they are paying attention? Because those are two very different things. And one of them is, oh, I'm going to put something in there that makes you stop and really reflect about something and think a little bit more deeply. Or I put in something that was in a footnote on, page 176 that if you didn't read it, you're not going to get this question right. Those two things look at students from very different perspectives. And one is helping to help that child grow. And the other one is to purposefully catch somebody who didn't pay 100% attention on every single little tiny detail, which most kids don't, because that's not where they are. So I also look at this like,
well, and again, when we're part of that process, we can help with the meaning making.
Yes. If you don't trust the kids, and you are therefore going to insert AI and to help control them. Really, Kelly, this is what I think all of it's about. That word control is so prevalent in education. If we stopped trying to control every single detail and aspect of kids, we would need to use AI. I mean, if you stop and think too, yes, we've had teachers. I've had one, you've had some that were not great teachers and they might have graded somebody in your class higher than you because they didn't like you. If that's the case, then that's an administrative issue and that teacher needs to not work with kids.
Well, again, we're talking about a different thing, right?
Exactly.
If we're talking about AI replacing bad teachers, maybe we just replace bad teachers with better teachers.
Yes.
Or maybe we change our teacher training programs.
Exactly. That is exactly what I was going to say. And we stop giving them scripts and textbooks that they have to teach to with fidelity, and help them learn to learn alongside kids. Because that's when you start to really, the best teaching I ever did is when I let go of control, and I didn't always do it. And I'm sure any student who's listening is going to go,
we weren't always perfect at it.
I remember that day or that week or that month or what. Yeah. But when I really let go of control and helped the kids, like I was a better facilitator of learning and helping them to think about things differently from multiple perspectives, then what the kids were able to do, what they understood, what they were able to create and analyze and evaluate was so incredibly rich because I got out of their way. I don't think you could do that with AI. That is a human thing.
Yeah. Okay, last little thing that I was thinking about this week. I think it was this week that you sent me a text about what if we just found the best teachers and AI will help us get the best teachers in front of 10 million kids. Was that you that sent me that?
So that was from Senator Rand Paul.
Yes.
There's a video of him where he said that we could improve education if we just got rid of a lot of teachers and hired only the best, which somehow objectively could happen, is what he's saying. And then we put them on video.
As if we would know that.
I know, right?
Yeah.
As if we could, even one of us could agree to all that. But he said we would basically put them on video, kind of like what happened during lockdown. And each of those really great teachers might be responsible for, and he said this, I'm quoting him, 1 million students or more at a time. So I'm like, this is like the worst college lecture course you've ever been in, right? And one of my friends, Jody, was like, oh, sure, I'm going to grade 1 million essays. And she goes, well, let's be honest, maybe like 999,000 essays. And I thought, again, this is someone who doesn't understand that teaching is not just delivery. Because,
well, and my response to you was, does he know that we've already done that?
Right.
It's called PBS,
right.
Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Like this has already been done. And yes, that is a successful version of that. And the way that you're thinking of it is not quite the same, it's a different version of that. But it kind of made me laugh because I was like, yeah, we've done
thinking
that.
Of like
Rainbow.
How many times we've got to fix a part on the washing machine and it's something that's pretty minor. We don't need to call in somebody that's an expert. I can look something up on YouTube, and because I know what I know, or my husband knows what he knows, we can watch the video of how to fix it. And then because we have our own wisdom, we can decide, do we have the expertise to do what they just did on the video? Or are we going to make things worse and it's going to cost us much more? And we do call in an expert mechanic or repair person to fix this. So again, that comes with some background knowledge already of, do I know what I don't know? Or
and back to your point of, this is somebody who assumes that education, that learning is regurgitation, is memorize and regurgitate.
and
Starting in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Layering on
I mean,
and starting in the wrong place once again.
I will continue to say ad nauseum that children are not little receptacles to fill, that they have to make meaning in the way that is from their own life experience. They have to do things with their hands and their bodies and their eyes and their ears. They have to engage their senses. It cannot just be a sit. I mean, if anything else, if we've decided that AI tutors are the future, what does that say about kids moving? There has to be like some physical, oh, well, now they're going to have an AI bot in their device that takes them on a run. Or, I mean,
it's going to be in their contacts, Michelle.
Their
glasses
can't.
Are going to have the AI built in. So everything they do.
There are so many visions of the future of how things could look. And I love a lot of them because they are really more about making life better for all people. But then there are some that I'm like, you just want to take all of the beauty that is humanity and make it accessible in a way to anybody who hasn't had to practice that skill. I just want to take like the violin for an example, right? Or being an artist, because I know your husband is an amazing artist. My son-in-law is an amazing artist. All of those people who are artists in that sense have spent years honing and practicing that skill. And because they can output something quite easily now comes from all of that process, right? And there are a lot of people who are saying, well, we shouldn't have to spend all of that time because I can use AI to create the same thing. And I'll say, no, it's a very poor replica of that same thing in air quotes. And also you're taking all of the human aspect out of it because you don't want to take the time to learn something that took that amount of time. What's worth doing and spending time on versus what's not? If AI
it's like nobody's ever seen WALL-E.
Right? That's it. Don't even listen to the podcast. Just go watch WALL-E.
Your assignment is go watch WALL-E.
It's a poor substitution. If it were transformative, which at this point it is not, and it's also stealing from other people's work without their consent, you cannot create with AI.
I don't know if you are experiencing this, but every education, anything I am getting these days, that's not wholly true. There's one that I can think of that doesn't fit this. But the bulk of what comes in my inbox from a variety of really companies that I really appreciate and their work is great. And that's why I subscribe to their stuff. The blogs that I'm subscribed, like all of these things. And what I am seeing is that every single one of them is using the AI version of a futuristic classroom. And I don't know if they're all using the same prompts, but the pictures look identical. Mm-hmm. I mean, they look identical, and it's on literally everything that comes to my inbox, to the point where I can't distinguish one brand from another anymore.
Right.
And because I interact with AI enough, I can see that a lot of what they're writing is AI generated. And so now I'm like, well, this has lost all usefulness for me. If I can ask my own AI this question you asked it, like, I don't need you anymore.
Right.
So I don't know. And it's because we've become as a culture so content obsessed, and we got to send out content and we need more content and all of this garbage. But what has ended up happening is we've outsourced all the content to AI, and it's no longer useful to me as a human for the reason I originally said, yes, send me your newsletter and your email. And I'm finding that the ones that I like the most are like Awkward Spirituality from Ryan Taylor, or Nadia Bolz-Weber's is great, or Brad Montag's phenomenal, like Scott Erickson. Like, it's the human in that makes it worth continuing to pay attention to. Heather Cox Richardson, like, I love what she's sending out now, but it's so human. She's synthesizing her life's work and helping make meaning. And I don't know, it makes me sad, these companies, that everything now looks the same. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what I'm here for anymore.
You just said the magic word. It's meaning. And I had a conversation with another educator about this. If, again, who's doing the work, who's doing the thinking? And in education and in business, in a lot of ways, we put so much emphasis on the end product. A lot of times the end product is not what matters. There's no meaning necessarily in the end product if it didn't have the journey to get there. The process and the journey are where the meaning is found. It's also where the learning happens. I don't learn anything from the end product unless I do some reflection on it, which is, again, part of the process. But again, all of that, we lose meaning in it because it's not meaningful when it's done for us. I could easily go buy.
So well said. It's not meaningful when it's done for us.
I could easily go buy a painting of my home, right? But if I painted that painting, it would mean more to me, even if it wasn't as good, because I did it. We as a society pay a lot of money for these masterful works of art. You think about the Da Vinci's, or when we look at Da Vinci as a master, yes, there are some really cool products, but when you look at any of the things that Da Vinci wrote about, it was the process and how to get there and what he learned in the process. If I make a piece of music with a violin on GarageBand, for example, and I copy it from something somebody else already did, or a master violinist plays something on a Stradivarius, which one is going to be more valuable, right? Or if there's an art sale at Christie's versus an NFT, which ones are actually more valuable over time? I mean, the NFTs obviously tanked because they're not valuable. There's no meaning behind them. They were just junk that somebody said, "Oh, hey, pay for this," right? So I think we have to keep going back to things that we've said those words, those exact phrases, going back to many times on this podcast, but anything that took the time, was worth the time of doing because the process was meaningful, that's where the value is. If I look at that from an education perspective, the learning, the teaching, the interaction, the relational piece of learning is where all the meaning is made. And those are the kids who get the benefits from an education. It won't be kids who just sit and learn from an AI tutor.
Well, and I think I shared this maybe in our assessment episode, but I'll share it again because it just fits so well. There's a show on YouTube, Bon Appetit Test Kitchen. Chef Chris Morocco gets blindfolded and they bring him the dish of a famous chef and he has to taste it and feel it and explore it and then recreate it, but he can't see it. And so the whole show is the journey of the nuance that he pulls out of the different tasting notes and how he's making, he's writing down what he thinks it is. And of course we can see it. And so we are like, it's not that, it's but you see the process of him deconstructing and making meaning of what he's experiencing. And then you see his process of, as a chef, how would I recreate something like that? Well, I'm going to need these kinds of ingredients. And I know that I can pull from this technique to get that same texture. And I know, so he's doing all of this and you're watching it in real time. And then he checks in with one of his coworkers and, they let him taste for a second time and they ask guiding questions and those kind of things. And then he recreates it. And then at the end, he gets a grade for how close he was to the original dish and in looks and in taste. That's cool. In, technique and whatever. And the show is worth watching because you're on the journey with him and you're hearing how he's thinking about recreating a dish and you're hearing how he as a chef thinks about the ingredients and the interplay and the tastes, and you're hearing the different techniques that he knows to pull from, and he'll try one thing and that didn't work. And so he'll try something else and, that's closer. Right. And so the whole magic of the show though is the journey of the meaning making. Right. It's not the end result. If we only had the AI would just give us the end result, there's nothing worth attending to there. Right. It's not worth paying attention to at that point. And I think about that all the time in assessment, that if we're only seeing the outcome, we've actually missed the thinking, right? We've missed all of what made the outcome worth paying attention to.
Right.
And I think the problem is we're a society so obsessed with the outcome, especially in education, that we ignore all of the journey that it took to get there. And this is why parents at schools I may have taught at do their child's project and it's Pinterest worthy and it's perfect and they get an A because nobody focused on, well, what was the process the child went through to get there? We just looked at the end product. And people who know Anastasis well may know that we did not have homework for this reason because we wanted to see the process. And we also did not have projects where they were doing everything at home. They almost never did anything at home because we wanted to see the thinking that was going in and the problem solving and the frustrations and the light bulb moments and all of those things.
Well, even just going back to your chef's, the story about that YouTube show, that chef had to have spent a lot of time learning about textures and flavors and how the chemistry involved in cooking and baking and all of that. So again, that life experience and all of that learning up to that point mattered. That process and that journey mattered for what he was doing in this process and journey. And without that, anytime we've tried to fast forward or skip steps or find something to, again, either make something more timely or efficient, or what was that movie? Was it with Adam Sandler where he would fast forward through parts of life that were rough?
Click, wasn't it called Click?
I think. But he realized he was missing all the good parts because sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's stressful. I don't want to go through this. But you miss a lot of richness of life. So again, what's worth taking the time through? What can we do to make more meaning? And again, because I'm more of a spiritual person, I look at it as what has soul. Those AI. Somebody posted a photo today and it had an AI image of a student in school. And I was like, and it didn't specify that it was AI generated. But the second I saw it, I knew that's what it was. And I was like, that child is soulless. That's not a real kid because everything on the skin, I mean, it's soulless. So is that what we want to create? I mean, I think some people would actually answer yes, because it's easier to control, but is that what we really want for kids, is to have a life that is so meaningless and without soul that they just know a bunch of answers, but they don't know why they know them or what it means?
And what we know about life is that so much of life is paradoxical.
It's messy.
It's not as straightforward as we like to pretend it is in education. And so, again, as somebody who has hired people, I get really nervous about who's going to be available in the workforce, like who's coming out of these educational situations and what does that mean for the future of because I want somebody who can be in the messy and the journey and the paradox, and it doesn't always look like we think, that's where the learning happens. That's where science lives. That's where math lives. Like it's in we don't know it all yet.
I wish that I had even half of the experience that I have now when I was younger, although I wouldn't have had the experiences I have now if I had them when I was younger. But you go back and you look at early years in teaching, and I know that there were a lot of things that I did well. There were a lot of things that I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking?
I cringe at so much of it.
But the one thing I really, really wish that I understood earlier was how relational and important those relations were to understanding how each person learns. That it wasn't just a matter of hard work or if you just try harder, you'll do better. I mean, those things aren't true. And that the kids who get the best grades are the best students, because that's also not true. If I had known those things when I was a younger teacher, I think I would have been more effective and at this point in my life, prouder of what I'd done. But I also see the journey that I had to be on to get to this place, because now I can look at it and say, wow, we really need to help younger teachers understand that, yes, you might have learned a lot about pedagogy specific to a teaching method in a specific content area. All of that's important, but what's more important is that you know your students and that you can connect them and trust them and not try to control them. And if you can get that far, you're going to be a much more effective teacher. You won't be efficient, but you will be effective.
I can't remember if I've said this on the pod before, but the question that we started with for Anastasis is, what would love look like expressed as a school? And I wish that was the starting point for everyone. But even saying it like that, you're right. That wasn't my starting point when I started as a new teacher, because I inherited a system that I was told this is how it works. And this is, the right way to do things. And you don't have enough life experience to be able to question what you've inherited and those assumptions and all that comes with it. I think at the end of the day, what's the most disheartening when I see what is currently being applied with AI, but even AI aside, it doesn't matter because it's what's happening. It's we keep adding tech thinking it's going to make it better, interactive whiteboards, like all of the things that we've seen throughout the years, is that it all assumes that we're teaching the average student as if there is such a person as an average student. And we know, if you've not read Todd Rose's book, The End of Average, go pick it up. It's phenomenal. Or watch any YouTube clip of him talking about it and you'll get a good idea. But I think the problem is that all of these assumptions and tools and ways that we keep getting stuck in the same cycle originate with the assumption that we are teaching the average student. And when you think about what does love look like expressed as a school, love has an object, right? Has a person. And so to love someone is to pay attention to them, to know them, to understand, to value them, to see them, to all of those things, the worthiness there. And so, I think the place that we keep starting is with the average, and that's actually the issue. And then we say, oh, we're going to personalize for the average student.
Based on what? Based on what? A standard?
Based on what? Yeah. How do you know? Yeah. How do you know who they are? I think what we mean is what a lot of people mean when they say personalization for the traditional model of education is we're going to treat this student as if they're average, but we're going to, I think what they mean is we're going to just pace it differently based on how they're performing on tests.
I mean, it's really like,
there's no person there.
It's also, it goes back to kind of tracking, which we stopped doing in school. So now it's tracking, but on a one-to-one basis in a way that isn't equitable to anyone. Yeah, I think that, there's so many things wrong with that. But what's right is, as you said, how can I look at creating a school that sees the kids as the unique individuals that they are and honor them rather than tell them, here's where your deficits are, and we're going to get you all up to speed and make sure you're all leaving here in the exact same place, because that's, we're not
that's what the world needs. Yeah.
We're not here to create stuff for children, nor do we want to. And I love...
But what could help create a bunch of Stepford children?
I know exactly what could. I love thinking about all of our students from Anastasis and how very different every single one of them was. And their individual gifts and strengths. And, when we look at school from a deficit model, a lot of those kids, by a lot of other school standards, would have been seen as lacking. And they miss out on all of the wonderful gifts that these kids have and where they are super strong. But no, we're not going to worry about their strengths. We got to fix this. And there's nothing to fix.
And how many kids believe that narrative?
Yes.
And we wonder why our dropout rates are what they are.
Right.
We wonder why so many kids are disengaged, why we have the attendance issues we have,
discipline problems, all of those things.
Can we trace back, huh?
I love that we didn't have to feel adversarial as the teachers and staff and students, because you built a community. You helped us all build a community together, and
we did it together. Yeah.
But that was your vision, Kelly. So I think back to other schools where, or even teacher prep, where it's like, distance yourself from those kids. And I'm not saying, cross lines or anything like that, but making sure that they see you as human and you see them as human. That is and you build mutual trust. You don't just tell the kids, well, you have to earn my respect, but you have to respect me. That was how I was taught to teach.
Yeah.
The students have to earn your respect, but they must respect you. I'm like, that now I look back and go, why on earth would any kid respect me if I didn't respect them at all?
And if I haven't built a relationship of trust to begin with, that can be built on. Yeah.
And that's, again, where you get discipline problems. You have kids who don't want to be in school. They hate school. And we just didn't experience
because it
that.
feels so obvious to me.
Know.
And when I am in these conversations, I'm like, why don't you see this? And I think it's because people are still moving through their own development.
Yes.
When you've never been in a place where you see that kind of interplay, it's hard to picture.
Right.
Which is why it makes me sad that we don't have a school running right now, because I'm like, I would love for everyone to be able to come through and really see that lived experience of what does it look like when we really do have a living community.
Yeah. And that's when you have, it wasn't everybody was best friends. Like, you had kids who still had some personality conflicts with other kids and with teachers. But again, there was,
and us as adults, we didn't always, it wasn't always rosy for us either.
But the expectation is
we were all real people showing up.
But the expectation is you live in a community. This is your community. And how do we take care of each other in a community? I think right now, when I look at, I don't know, how many of your neighbors do you know and interact with regularly?
This is not a fair question right now because it's different than it has been all the years we've lived in this house. The reason why it's unfair, though, is because when I don't have my Anastasis community, I have been more intentional about building community in my neighborhood. So we've been doing more with our immediate neighbors. So I know more of our neighbors now than we ever have. Usual response to that question would be like, yeah, I know their names, maybe. And we wave, and that is the extent. And then we all go in our separate houses and like exist separately.
What was it like? Was it the same or was it different when you were a kid?
Different. I mean, we knew every neighbor. And I mean, my parents were doing like progressive dinners and things like that all the time, which is why I think now, not having the Anastasis community where that feels like a place where I'm rooted is, I'm getting to know my neighbors and we're doing dinners and we're doing things like that more together, which has been so fun. It changes how you are when you're outside of the house. It changes how, you pause and stop the car and check in with people on your way out of the neighborhood.
Right. I don't know the actual statistics, but I have read several articles that have said that over the decades since I was a kid in the 70s, people have started knowing their neighbors less and less. A lot of factors for that. A lot of it is, they're too busy working. They are very rarely home.
Yeah.
But I would say that every neighborhood I lived in when I was a kid, we knew all of our neighbors on the entire block. Yeah. There might have been a house that we kind of avoided because they didn't like kids or something, but everybody, even for the families or the houses that didn't have kids, we knew everybody. We had block parties all the time. It was a thing that people did. And I'm seeing that not only personally, but I've read that that is also the case. And it just makes me wonder again, if the lack of community, because if you don't know your neighbors, there's that fear of the unknown, right? If you don't, or you do know your neighbors and you're like, well,
mistrust of the unknown.
Yeah. And well, I know this person because they're my neighbor, but not that person who lives, a mile away. Yeah. I wonder how much just the sheer numbers of people have kind of changed the way we view community. And I know that other cultures are different, but I feel like in community, you have responsibility to each other. And you tend to want to help people in your community. But if you don't see that you have a community, then you're very much isolated from that.
We probably have talked about this, but how we are not good in schools at teaching people how to exist in community well.
Right. And when you don't have
that was not something that was cultivated in any schools that I have been in.
Right.
We cultivated that very, very intentionally at Anastasis. of like, we want kids who know how to be in community well. That means we know how to resolve conflict. We know how to be in conflict in healthy ways. We know how, like, healthier ways. I don't know that we necessarily nailed that all the time, but
even
definitely
teaching them how to apologize in a way that it isn't just saying sorry, moving on, that there has to be some sort of atonement there and desire to do better the next time. When you know better, you do better, right? So we would...
And to restore the brokenness, and that it might take time. It doesn't happen overnight, like all of those pieces.
It makes me think that people who don't have that experience of community, regardless of whether it's a neighborhood or a house of faith or a school or whatever, that they are the ones who turn to technology for their community and are maybe more likely to be dependent upon a bot who interacts with them because they're getting what they don't actually have.
I think this is so interesting that a lot of the statistics around where like big tech companies send their kids to school, and it is a lot of them are sending their kids to Montessori, a Reggio Emilia, a Waldorf, these alternative models. They're not sending their kids to the schools where they're sat in front of a computer or where they're not sending their kids to those schools. They're like very experiential. And it's a higher statistics than, the average. And so it seems like that should tell us something.
Something for me, but not for thee. Is that the statement?
I don't know. Or even just the understanding of what the tech is and what it shouldn't be.
Right.
It could even be as simple as that. And I don't know enough to know why that is, but I do think it's interesting.
I like looking at schools. Go ahead.
Those who can tend to choose schools that are more Anastasis flavored.
And when we talk about school choice, then it shouldn't come down to really who has the most money.
Right.
And I'm not saying that we should have school choice in the form of vouchers, because then that takes away from public education. And therefore, kids who don't have a choice still don't have a choice. I wish that we would be able to work with public education to help move it forward in a way that does make it, again, we have smaller schools, we have communities within those schools. Because again, most people in the United States who have children, especially in elementary schools, will say that they are not sure or they don't like public education except for their school. So the majority of people who have kids in public schools like their home school. I like looking at schooling in other cultures, especially the cultures where community is extremely important.
Indigenous cultures are really interesting to see how they,
And again, there are pockets of that all over the world, but it's interesting to see, again, where are your priorities and what those are and how they affect how you educate children. That's pretty eye-opening, especially when you start looking at how we keep comparing ourselves on the PISA tests. Like, well, you're comparing apples and oranges because the school systems aren't even the same. So when you say that we're failing or lagging behind or whatever, that doesn't make any sense because you're talking about two different things. That's not how that education works in that place. Whether you want to look at Norway or Japan or Italy or wherever it happens to be, you're talking about completely different systems of education, as well as cultural differences in how they approach community and public health and things like that. So interesting to, like, you can't use that as it's not a fair measure.
Yeah. Well, we went all over the place as we typically do, but it's because it's all connected.
It is.
And we see it as connected, and I wish that more people would see it as connected. I think my takeaway is, can we get people... To me, this is the perfect opportunity when we see what AI is doing culturally to the job market. This is the perfect opportunity to say, we need to radically rethink what is happening in education and what we want citizens to look like. And then we need to rethink how we're doing education, rather than what I fear is that we just keep kind of being sheep and herding people along and keep going down the same paths. And like I said, accelerating bad pedagogy with tech.
I really look at it as, again, I have huge issues with the ethical use of AI and what it pulls from without consent. I have huge issues with the ethical piece of who's doing the programming and whose kids are going to end up being taught by an AI tutor versus who gets a human. There's not equity in there at all. Those pieces, and again, I'm not averse to using any kind of tools if I feel like the ethical implications aren't so high. And this one really, I have too many red flags, way too many red flags to even think about using it with kids of any age, not just little kids. I think we have a lot more work to do before this is even something that we could say, yes, we should try it. And I'm not into experimenting with, there's a generation of kids already who, they struggle. We had a once in a lifetime, which may not be once in a lifetime, but pandemic that we lived through. It was traumatic on a global level, and we're still not understanding how traumatic that was. And we have kids who lived through that, who had essentially 2 or more years of their lives that either stagnated or impacted them in a trauma sense that we need to help them move on. And just throwing more tech at them is not going to solve that problem because it's a human problem. So I'm going to stay on that side of, I think we need to do a lot more soul searching, and we also need to do a lot more improving before we really start using these tools in the classroom.
Well, and slow down, like you said, slow down enough, pause enough to ask the question that you asked, with your sea turtles.
Right.
To really be reflective as we're making decisions on behalf of little people.
Yeah. And sometimes the big people.
And big people. Yeah. All of us.
All of us. Yeah.
Well, it was fun to catch up.
Yeah. Always love it.
Always love it. And we'll say onward.
Onward.
Hey, Michelle, where else can people find you online?
I blog at avenue4learning.com, and the 4 is the actual number 4, not the word 4, avenue4learning.com.
And you can find me at dreamsofeducation.wordpress.com, which is my original blog. You can also find me at ktsplace.com, which is where I share a bunch of resources and kind of projects that we're currently working on. And we are both on Blue Sky at the moment, but not as active as we once were on our favorite bird. Come find us and connect with us in other places, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Education.